Picture a city of 2 million people where the most dangerous thing about you is who you love. Not the cholera, which killed 50,000 Londoners in 1832 alone. Not the gin. Not the factory machines that take fingers as casually as a man takes a pinch of snuff. Not the river, which is essentially an open sewer that the city calls a highway. Not the footpads, the fever courts, the 10-to-a-room rookeries where tuberculosis moves through families like a slow fire. No, the most dangerous thing about you is who you went home with last night. That's London in 1833, a city that can hang you for it, a city that will, before it hangs you, put you in the pillory, which is a wooden frame in a public square that locks your head and hands in place so you can't move, can't cover your face, can't do anything except stand there while whatever the crowd feels like throwing arrives at your skull at whatever velocity the crowd decides is appropriate. Stones, dead cats, a bucket of slaughterhouse offal that someone spent the morning collecting specifically for this occasion, broken glass if they're feeling thorough, and the particular cruelty of London, the thing that makes it almost beautiful in its ugliness, is that 10 yards from that pillory there's a flower cellar, and a coffee house where men read the newspaper and argue about the Reform Act, and a boy selling hot pies from a cart, and the pies smell like salvation, and the sparrows are fighting in the gutter over a crust of bread, and the church bells are ringing somewhere, and it all sounds like it could be any ordinary morning in any ordinary city where nothing is trying to kill you. Except you know better. You are a man who loves men. And in London, 1833, that is a capital offence. That means death. That means the rope. That means your name in the morning papers and your body on display and everything you ever built. Every friendship, every reputation, every shilling saved towards something better, burned to ash in the space of a single magistrate's decision. So you have learned to be careful. You have learned to move through this city like water moves through a crack in stone, finding the spaces, fitting the shape, taking up no more room than you absolutely have to, and you are very, very good at it by now. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if most of you are listening or if half of you are already somewhere between here and sleep, which is honestly where I want you. But if you are still awake, think about what it means to live in a city that contains everything you need and will destroy you for needing it. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you like. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. The ceiling above you is the first thing close and grimy. The plaster in one corner gone soft from a leak that Mrs. Callaway has been meaning to fix since October and almost certainly will not fix before March. You know this ceiling. You know every crack and stain. You have spent enough sleepless hours staring at it that it has become, against your better judgment, something like a companion. The room smells like a room that has only one person in it. That sounds simple. It isn't. A room that has 2 people in it smells like compromise, like the particular negotiation of 2 bodies sharing limited air. The soap one of them prefers, the tobacco the other one smokes, the meals they've cooked, and the clothes they've left out, and the accumulated daily residue of 2 people choosing, consciously or not, to be in the same space. A married man's room smells like a life that has been built with someone else. Your room smells like you, and only you, and nothing else. Tallow candle wax, gone cold on the holder by the window. The damp cloth you used to wash last night draped over the chair back and already slightly sour. A faint sweetness from the ink you carry in your pocket every day for work, and which has, over months of proximity, worked its way into the fabric of your coat so permanently that you sometimes smell it in your dreams. Coal dust from the grate, which holds last night's ash and not much else, because coal costs money, and this room is cold most mornings from October through April, which means it is cold this morning, which means your breath makes small ghosts in the air above your face when you exhale. Welcome to London, November 1833. You're lying in a bed roughly wide enough for one person sleeping carefully, on a mattress stuffed with flock that has seen better decades, in a second-floor room at number 14 Calvert's Lane, Holborn, half a mile north of the Inns of Court, 3 streets from where you work, above a chandler's shop that smells of tallow day and night, in a house owned and operated by Mrs. Agatha Callaway, who is 62, recently widowed and deeply suspicious of men who don't have wives. Your name is Thomas Everett. You're 26 years old. You arrived in London 4 years ago from Norwich with a letter of introduction, a canvas bag containing 2 changes of clothing, a Bible your mother pressed on you at the coach stop and which you have never opened, and absolutely nothing else. You'd been told that London would change you. The people who told you this meant it as a warning. They weren't entirely wrong. You sit up. The cold hits your face and chest like a flat hand. Across the room, the small window shows you the grey nothing of a November sky beginning to get slightly less dark, which in London at this time of year is the closest you get to sunrise. Below the window, Calvert's Lane is already making its first sounds, the clop of a horse, unhurried, probably a dray, the rolling complaint of cartwheels on cobblestones. Somewhere further away, a dog that has decided dawn is an excellent time for its grievances. The floorboards are cold through your stockings as you stand, cold and gritty. Mrs. Callaway sweeps the upstairs hallway twice a week, which is twice more than she sweeps anything else. But there is only so much a broom can do about the perpetual contribution of the chandler's shop below. Everything in this house, from the curtains to your skin, carries a faint film of tallow smoke. You've stopped noticing it mostly. What you notice is when it's absent, those rare days when you've spent enough time outdoors that the smell of the street overpowers everything else. And then when you come back inside, it hits you fresh and you remember what it is. The basin is on the washstand by the window. The water you poured last night has a skim of cold on the surface that isn't quite ice, but is trying. You break it with your fingers. The water underneath is shockingly cold, knife cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just feel like a temperature, but feels like a decision the water has made about you personally. You wash your face with it anyway. You splash it on the back of your neck. You stand there dripping for a moment, awake now in the way you can only be awake when cold water is running down your collar. Your clothes are over the chair where you left them last night, the same clothes you wear every day to the office, a white linen shirt, somewhat less white than it began the week, dark wool trousers, brushed last Sunday, a waistcoat in a dull olive that you bought second-hand from a stall on Monmouth Street for 1 shilling and 4p, which was 3 halfpence more than you wanted to pay, but which fits well enough that you forgave the excess within the week. Your coat goes over all of it, dark blue, heavy wool, the kind of coat that in a city full of clerks marks you as a clerk. In London, 1833, clothes are not just warmth. They are not just protection from the weather. They are the first and sometimes only sentence you write about yourself before anyone else gets to read you. You have been very deliberate about that sentence for 4 years. The sentence says, respectable. The sentence says, employed. The sentence says, ordinary, harmless, nothing interesting here. Keep walking. It does not say, lonely in ways that don't have polite names. It does not say, Awake at 2 in the morning wondering whether what you feel is a variation of what everyone feels, or something the law has decided to call a crime. It does not say any of the other things that are also true. You learn that quickly in London. The city will read you in 3 seconds if you let it, so you don't let it. Downstairs, Mrs. Callaway is already moving in the kitchen. You can hear her through the floor, the specific weight of her footstep, heavier on the right because of the knee she hurt last winter, and which has never fully healed, and the sound of the iron kettle being lifted and placed with the particular clank of a woman who's done this 10,000 times and no longer thinks about it. The smell of coal smoke beginning to rise through the floorboards, thin and acrid, means she's got the kitchen fire going. It means breakfast is coming. It means another day has begun, whether you are ready for it or not. You do not have a fireplace in your room. One of the conditions of renting at this price. The other condition is that you take your meals with Mrs. Callaway, which costs 4 shillings a week on top of the 6 and sixpence of the room, and which means you sit across a table from a woman who views your continued bachelorhood as something between a personal failing and a low-grade insult. She has a daughter in Bermondsey. She mentions this daughter regularly. She mentions this daughter the way a hunter might mention the general direction of a particular forest. You're not going to marry the daughter in Bermondsey. You're not going to marry anyone. But you've learned not to say that directly. What you say, when pushed, is that you're not yet in a position, that a copying clerk's wage, 15 shillings a week, which is decent enough, which keeps you housed and fed and no more, is not the foundation for a household. You let this serve as an explanation. Most people accept it as one. Mrs. Callaway, you suspect, does not. The stairs creak under your feet in the specific pattern you know by now. 3rd step, 5th step, the landing with its loose board that you step over by instinct. And then you're in the kitchen, which is warm in the way that only a kitchen with a working fire at 7 in the morning is warm, which is to say completely and immediately and almost aggressively warm after the cold of your room. The range is loaded and going well. The kettle sings. A rasher of bacon in the pan spits and pops with the sound like distant applause. Mrs. Callaway glances up from the pan. She's a substantial woman with grey hair pulled back under a cap, and the expression of someone who has made peace with most of what life has given her, but reserves the right to be quietly annoyed about the rest. "You're up," she says, which is not a greeting exactly, but is close enough. "Good morning, Mrs. Callaway. Cold enough for you upstairs?" "Fine," you say, which is not true, but which is the only socially acceptable answer. Complaining about the cold in your room would require addressing the fact that there is no fireplace in your room, which would require addressing the fact that you pay for a room without a fireplace, which would require addressing the fact that this is what 15 shillings a week looks like in London in 1833, which would leave everyone feeling uncomfortable at 7 in the morning, and so, fine. You sit at the table, which is covered with a cloth that has been laundered so many times the original pattern is entirely theoretical, and you wait for the tea. She brings it without being asked. This is one of the things about Mrs. Callaway that you have come, over 4 years, to feel something about. She doesn't ask. She just brings, hot and dark and stewed slightly past the point of delicacy, the way she makes tea, the way everyone in this part of Holborn makes tea. Tea as a function rather than a pleasure. Tea as fuel rather than ceremony. You wrap both hands around the cup and feel the warmth move up your palms and into your wrists and forearms, and for a moment nothing else matters. The bacon arrives, half a rasher, and 2 slices of bread, one spread with a scraping of butter. This is breakfast, Monday through Saturday. On Sundays there is sometimes an egg. There is no occasion on which there is more butter. You eat without hurrying. Outside the kitchen window, the lane is getting lighter by degrees, the grey sky committing slowly to something paler, and the sounds of Holborn waking up. The carts, the voices, the church bells from St Andrew's 2 streets over striking the quarter hour, arrive with the regularity of something that was always going to happen and is only just getting around to it. "My daughter is coming Sunday," Mrs. Callaway says, not looking up from her own breakfast. "Is she?" you say, in the tone of polite interest that commits to nothing. "She'd like to meet the people of the house." Naturally, a pause. The bacon pops in the pan. The kettle settles into a lower register as the heat distributes. "She's a handsome girl," Mrs. Callaway says, "very accomplished. Her late husband left her in good circumstances." You drink your tea. "I'm sure she's delightful," you say. And then, before she can bill to wherever she's going, "I may have work obligations Sunday. Mr. Hartley has mentioned something about the summer scale brief." Mr. Hartley has mentioned nothing of the sort. Mr. Hartley never works on Sundays, but he is conveniently distant from this kitchen and cannot contradict you. Mrs. Callaway's expression shifts in a way you have learned to read. Not anger. She rarely gets angry. Something more like resignation, settling into her face the way silt settles to the bottom of standing water. She thinks you are stubborn. She may be right. She thinks your reasons are economic, or pride, or the particular masculine reluctance to be moved before you have decided to move yourself. She's not right about that, but her version serves you better than the truth. You finish your breakfast. You stand. You say good morning again. You take your hat from the hook by the door and your coat from the other hook, the one that holds your coat and only your coat, with no second coat ever hanging next to it, and you go out into the morning. Calvert's Lane hits you with everything at once. This is London. This is always London. The cold first. Genuine cold now, a November morning that has remembered winter. And then the smell, which in this part of Holborn is a combination of horse, coal smoke, baking bread from the bakehouse at the corner, and beneath all of it, the permanent bass note of a city of 2 million people, producing everything that 2 million people produce and sending most of it into the street. The mud underfoot is thick and particular, not just soil, but the accumulated business of horses and market waste and rain and boots and everything else that finds its way to the ground and gets walked in until it becomes something with no natural precedent. You step over a drain. You step around a pile of something that you do not look at closely. A woman with a basket on her arm passes you going the other direction, fast, purposeful, already at full London speed at 7:15 in the morning. You walk. Your route to the Inns of Court takes you south, down toward Chancery Lane, through the part of Holborn that hasn't quite decided if it's respectable or not. On your right, a lodging house that rents by the night. On your left, a printer's where the press has already been running since 5 in the morning, thudding through the walls with its mechanical heartbeat. The smell of ink and hot metal drifts from the open ground floor window, dense and sharp and oddly pleasant. You've always liked that smell. You've always been around printers and solicitors and the people who move paper through the world. The law office where you work, Hartley and Symes, solicitors, Lincoln's Inn, established 1798, is a small firm with 4 qualified attorneys, 2 senior clerks, and yourself, what they call a copying clerk, which means you spend most of your working hours transcribing documents in a hand neat enough to be legally valid, deeds, contracts, depositions, wills that run to 20 pages and require copying twice. Occasionally, on days that feel designed to make you think about your situation in a specific way, statutes, the law of England, copied out in your own neat hand. You have copied out sections of the Offences Against the Person Act of 1828 3 times now. Once, when Mr. Hartley was assembling documents for a case involving a disputed will, and the act had some bearing on a related matter. Once, when you were asked to compile a digest of current criminal statutes. Once, when a solicitor from another firm wanted copies made, and Hartley and Symes needed the half-guinea fee. Section 16. You know it the way you know the Lord's Prayer, not because you have chosen to memorize it, but because you have spent enough time in its presence that it has soaked in by proximity alone. Every person convicted of the abominable crime of buggery, committed either with mankind or with any animal, shall suffer death as a felon. You copied it out in your best hand. Clear ascenders, even spacing, the particular slight forward lean that your writing school in Norwich identified as your distinguishing characteristic, and that you have never quite been able to eliminate. You copied it out, and you blotted it, and you handed it over, and you went to the next page and the next document and the next task. You are very good at moving on to the next thing. Chancery Lane is already busy. This is the legal heart of London. The Inns of Court, the legal offices, the barristers and clerks and law students and document carriers who make this quarter of the city run. You know these streets the way you know your own hands. Chancery Lane to Lincoln's Inn Fields. The great square with its plane trees bare now. The leaves down weeks ago. The branches grey against the grey sky. The buildings around the square solid and permanent and serious in the way that only buildings connected to the law manage to be serious. You go in through the gatehouse and across the yard to Hartley and Symes. The office occupies 2 floors of a building that was built in 1743 and has been updating its opinion about that decision ever since. The floors lean. The windows do not close all the way, which in November is a fact about the office almost as defining as anything written on the door. The main room, where you and the other senior clerk, a man called Phillips, spend most of your day, is perhaps 20 feet by 15, lined on 2 sides with shelves of deed boxes and bound volumes, furnished with 2 high writing desks, and heated by a fireplace that is currently doing its brave best with the coal it's been given. Phillips is already there. He always is. Phillips is 44 and has worked for Hartley and Symes for 18 years and has the specific settled quality of a man who has made his peace with exactly where he is. He is also married with 3 children in Islington, and he brings his lunch in a cloth every day and eats at his desk and never asks about yours. Morning, he says, not looking up from whatever he's transcribing. Morning, you say. You hang your coat on the hook by the door. You take your place at your desk. You open the current work, a deed of conveyance for a property in Southwark, 3 pages so far and at least 2 to go. And you dip your pen and you begin. The scratch of pen on paper is the sound your days are made of. Not dramatic, not exciting. The steady, controlled movement of a quill across good writing paper, making the letters come out correct and clear and unambiguous in their meaning, which is what law requires of them. You have developed over 4 years a kind of trance for this work. Your hand moves and your eyes track, and some part of your brain monitors the text for errors, but another part of your brain, the part that is always running, always thinking, always calculating the particular arithmetic of your situation, goes somewhere else entirely. Today it goes, as it often goes, to last night. Last night you walked east, after dark, from Holborn to Covent Garden. This is not unusual. Thousands of men walk east from Holborn to Covent Garden every evening. Covent Garden in the evening is London's living room. The theatre, the opera, the taverns, the coffee houses, the market winding down and the evening trade winding up, the flower sellers and the orange girls and the men selling hot chestnuts from little braziers that glow like hot coals in the November dark. But you didn't go to the theatre, and you didn't go to any of the coffee houses that would recognise you as the kind of man who should be in a coffee house. You went to a particular street, a particular turning, a particular establishment that from the outside looks like what it advertises itself as, which is a tavern of no special distinction, and which from the inside is something else entirely. The ink on the deed of conveyance dries evenly. You move to the next line. Your hand is steady. It is always steady when you work. One of the things you're good at is keeping your hand steady. But you're thinking about last night. The thing about London in 1833 is that it's enormous, and enormous cities have always had room for the things that smaller places cannot accommodate. London has 2 million people. 2 million people contain within them every possible variation of the human animal. You arrived here from Norwich 4 years ago knowing what you were. You'd known since you were 16 and working as an errand boy for a printer named Aldous, who had a son named Jack. But in Norwich you were in a city of 30,000 people, where everyone knew someone who knew you, where your family was 3 streets away, where the distance between yourself and catastrophe was the width of a rumour. In London you can disappear. In London you can be whatever the front of you says you are and keep the rest behind the door and pull the door tight. What you couldn't know when you arrived was that you weren't the only one doing it. The quill scratches. Phillips turns a page. The fire pops. Outside the window, Lincoln's Inn Fields receives the morning. The plane trees bare and grey, and the walks already filling with legal men moving purposefully in legal directions. You think about the man last night. You think about his hands. You think about the specific warmth of a room that has other people in it who know what you are and have decided that this is not, on balance, a problem. You think about how it feels to laugh without calculating the risk of laughing, about talking without building the sentence in advance to remove the dangerous parts. It lasts, these evenings, 3 hours, maybe 4. Then you leave separately. Then you walk home in the dark. Then you're back in the room that smells like only you. Then Mrs. Callaway's breakfast and the cold water in the basin and the coat that says nothing except ordinary, harmless, keep walking. You move to the next page of the deed. Around 11, Mr. Hartley himself appears from the inner office. He's a small, precise man of 53 who has the bearing of someone who has spent 3 decades in careful proximity to the law, and has absorbed its formality into his skeleton. He does not shout. He does not joke. He reviews the work of his employees with the concentrated attention of a man who understands that a single, incorrect word in a legal document can unravel everything downstream of it. He reviews your morning's work for approximately 45 seconds. He says nothing negative, which in the vocabulary of Hartley and Symes is the equivalent of high praise. The summer scale probate will need to be ready by Thursday, he says. Understood, sir. Phillips will provide the existing documents. It's a long one. There are some amendments. Of course. He goes back to his office. The door closes with a soft finality. Across the room, Phillips is already locating the summer scale file from the shelf. This is your life from 9 until 5, Monday through Saturday, in a room where the windows won't quite close all the way, and the fire does its best and the scratch of pens marks time like a very slow clock. This is the visible part of your life. The part that has a wage and a record and a letter of commendation from the previous firm in Norwich where you worked for 2 years before coming to London. The part that can be produced as evidence of a respectable existence. You have built this life very carefully. You understand, with a clarity that comes from 4 years of practice, that this visible life is not decoration. It is armour. It is the reason that when something goes wrong, and in London something can always go wrong, a wrong turn, a wrong face, a magistrate who is having a bad day and looking for a case, you have something to hold up and say, look, here I am, here is my employer, here is my lodging house, here is my character reference. Here is the entirety of my respectable existence in ink and paper and verifiable fact. Look at me. I am nothing unusual. I am the opposite of unusual. The summer scale probate is 47 pages of amended testament. You begin at the beginning and you do not look up until Philip says it's past 1, and he's having his lunch if you don't mind. You do not mind. You put down your pen, flex your hand. The joint's stiff now. The familiar ache of a morning's sustained writing settled into the second and third fingers of your right hand, and you reach for your own lunch, which you packed this morning. 2 slices of bread with yesterday's cold mutton, wrapped in paper, along with an apple that has gone slightly soft but is still edible. You eat at your desk. You look out the window at Lincoln's Inn Fields. Phillips, eating his own lunch across the room, does not look up either. You have shared this office for 4 years, and you have never, to the best of your knowledge, had what could be called a personal conversation. You know that he has a wife named Mary, and that one of his children has a persistent cough, and that he prefers his coal in the brazier rather than in the grate. He knows that you live in Holborn and that you are from Norwich and that you take your work seriously. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is, in fact, the ideal quantity of things a man knows about you when you are living the kind of life you are living. After lunch, you return to the summer scale probate. The afternoon passes in the way that afternoons pass in offices concerned with legal documents, steadily, without drama, with the particular grey quality of work that is necessary and important and entirely invisible to everyone who's not directly involved with it. You copy, you blot, you turn pages. Outside the window, the November sky goes from grey to a slightly darker grey, and eventually to the deep charcoal that is London's version of evening, arriving today, as it does every November day, somewhere around 3:30. By 5, you have completed 30 of the 47 pages. This is good progress. Hartley, reviewing the afternoon's output with his brief comprehensive attention, says so in as many words. Good progress. High praise indeed. You put on your coat. You say good evening to Phillips. You go out through the gatehouse and into the evening city. This is where the day shifts. All day you have been the copying clerk. All day you have been the ordinary, harmless, nothing interesting here version of Thomas Everett. And there is a kind of peace in that. A clean, simple, uncomplicated peace. The peace of a man who has pulled on his acceptable self like a well-fitting coat and spent the day not thinking about anything that isn't immediately in front of him. You've gotten very good at that particular peace. You have cultivated it the way a gardener cultivates a reliable herb, not glamorous, but useful and present when you need it. But now the day is over and the evening is yours, and the city is dark and full of possibility and peril in proportions that are never entirely clear until you're already inside them. You walk north from Lincoln's Inn toward Holborn, but you don't go directly home, you walk the long way. The long way takes you through the eastern edge of Covent Garden, where the market has left the cobblestones wet and the air smells of trampled vegetation, cabbage leaves, bruised fruit, and something sweetly rotten under everything, the daily compost of thousands of transactions. The stalls are closed, but the detritus remains. Broken crates, scattered straw, the occasional abandoned vegetable too damaged to sell. A woman is gathering it up with systematic efficiency, loading what can be salvaged into a sack. She doesn't look up as you pass. There is no reason for her to look up. You are a man in a dark coat walking through Covent Garden in the evening, and there are 1,000 men in dark coats in this vicinity right now, all of them walking at the same purposeful pace that means I am going somewhere legitimate. Do not detain me. The pace is important. You learn this early. Stand still in London and people look at you. Walk with purpose and you become invisible. London's streets are rivers of purpose, and no one looks twice at a piece of purposeful flotsam moving with the current. You turn down a side street off Long Acre, then another, then a narrow passage between two buildings that smells of horse and coal, and the particular damp of passages that the sun hasn't reached since approximately the reign of George II. On the other side of the passage, a short street. On the short street, 3 buildings side by side, unremarkable. A chandler's, a lodging house, and between them a public house with the sign above the door that you know well by now, and which shows a faded painted image of 3 trees with no name visible except what has been painted below the image in letters that have half given up. The 3 Elms. There is nothing about the 3 Elms that announces itself. That is the point. Every establishment in this part of London that serves the purpose it serves has learned, over generations, that the first requirement is to look like somewhere you would not look twice at. The door is heavy and ordinary. The single window to the left of the door has the kind of dark interior that could be anything, and from the outside is nothing. A man going past on the street would see a public house. Common enough in this part of London that they are sometimes 3 to a block, and he would not need to look again. You go in. The warmth hits you immediately, and after the November street it feels almost aggressive. The warmth of a fire and of a room with too many people in it for its size, and with it the smell, which is coal smoke and pipe tobacco and ale and the particular warm human smell of a closed room in November, with perhaps 15 or 20 bodies in it and no window open. You stand in the doorway for a moment, letting your eyes adjust from the dark street to the lamplight inside, which is low and amber and moves with the draught from the door you've just opened. The room settles back to itself around you. It is smaller than a room this crowded has any right to be, perhaps 30 feet by 20, with a low ceiling that the lamp smoke has been staining since before any of the current occupants were born. A bar across the far end, behind which a woman of perhaps 50 with arms like dock rope is drawing ale with the automatic efficiency of someone who's been doing this since before thought was required. Tables, most of them occupied. High-backed benches along the walls that provide a degree of enclosure, of privacy, that the main floor does not. And in all of this, men of different ages, men dressed as clerks, as tradesmen, as workers, as gentlemen managing down, men talking in the low-voiced specific register of people who are being careful about their volume without appearing to be careful, men sitting closer together than men customarily sit in other public houses. Men whose hands occasionally rest on the table in ways that are not accidental. You know some of them, not all. London's community of men who love men is not a small thing. In a city of 2 million, it is, if anything, vast and various and in constant motion. But it is a careful thing, and the places where it gathers are few enough that you accumulate familiar faces over time. The man by the far wall with the grey side whiskers and the well-worn coat, a solicitor's clerk, you believe, from somewhere in the city. You've exchanged perhaps 12 sentences with him, across as many visits, but you know his face, and he knows yours, and this constitutes something. 2 young men at the nearest table, who can't be older than 20, sitting very close together and talking with the concentrated intensity of people discovering they have been understood for the first time, their faces doing the work of faces that are trying to stay calm when they are not in fact calm. A man of perhaps 60, alone at the end of the bar, drinking his ale in steady measured sips, his face entirely neutral, the face of a man who has decided that the best way to exist in the world is to make as little impression upon it as possible. You understand him completely. You make your way to the bar. Evening Nell, you say, which is what she's called, and which she accepts with the particular tolerance of a woman who has run this establishment for 7 years and has no illusions about her customers and no interest in developing any. Thomas, the usual. The usual is a pint of ale for 2p, which is exactly what you can afford to spend and still have something left in your pocket by the time Thursday's wage is due. She draws it without further ceremony and sets it before you, and you take it and find a space at the end of the bar where you can lean and drink and be in the room without committing immediately to any particular corner of it. You drink the first inch of ale. The room settles around you in a way that no other room settles. This is the thing you can't explain to anyone who doesn't already know it. The specific quality of relief that comes from being in a room where you don't have to perform anything. Where the self that fits the coat and the neat handwriting and the good morning Mrs. Callaway and the reasonable excuses about Sunday visits, where that self can just sit down for a while and stop. You are still careful. You are always careful. But you're careful the way a man is careful in a room where the danger comes from outside, not inside. The danger at the Three Elms is someone reporting it. The danger is the wrong magistrate being convinced to do something with a complaint. The danger is external, and it keeps everyone in the room alert to the street, alert to strangers, alert to the particular quality of wrongness that descends when something is not as it should be. But the danger inside the room is zero. Inside the room, you don't have to monitor your face. You've been monitoring your face for 4 years. Your face has gotten very good at being readable only as far as you want it to be. But the effort of that has weight, and here, for 3 hours, you can put it down. The man with the grey side whiskers. You finally learned his name 2 months ago. It's Farrow. Edmund Farrow. He works for a firm in Cornhill, catches your eye and raises his glass. You raise yours. This is your friendship. Across the room, the 2 young men have stopped trying to be calm and are simply talking, their heads close, entirely oblivious to everything except each other. Nell draws another pint for someone without being asked. A man you don't know takes the space next to you at the bar. He's perhaps 30, dark-haired, with a face that is doing nothing in particular, and doing it with the specific practiced neutrality that you recognise, because it's what your own face is doing. Brown coat, good quality shoes, slightly worn. The hands of someone who works with them, but not rough. Careful work, controlled work. Something like your own hands. He orders his ale. He drinks the first inch. He doesn't look at you. This is how it begins at the Three Elms. This is how it always begins, with the not looking, with the deliberate orientation of two bodies in the same space toward the same neutral point, which is everything and nothing, which is the whole vocabulary of a world that has had to learn to conduct itself in subtext. After a moment without turning his head, "First time I've seen you here. I've been coming a while," you say. "Later in the week, usually." "Mostly." A pause. He drinks. You drink. The room continues its careful low-pitched conversations around you. "Thomas," you say. "William." He says it quietly. Not the name of someone announcing himself. The name of someone handing over something breakable. You talk for 2 hours. This is the other thing. How easy the conversation is when it's possible, when both parties know the shape of the space they're operating in. You talk about work, because you both work with documents, and there is a great deal of territory there. You talk about London, about the specific quality of the city in November, about the way the cold changes the smell of the streets. He is from Derbyshire originally, 3 years in London, works in a counting house off Fenchurch Street. He lives in Southwark, which means he's crossed the river tonight specifically to be here, which means something. You don't say that, neither does he, but it means something. You talk for 2 hours and then you don't. You leave separately. You leave at intervals the way everyone leaves, not together, not in a group, one by one with the practiced casualness of men who happen to be in the same public house and are now coincidentally leaving. Nothing to see. Keep walking. Farrow nods at you as you go. The two young men are still there, still talking. Nell doesn't say goodbye, which is also correct. The street outside is very cold and very dark. You stand for a moment in the passage between the Three Elms and the Chandlers, letting your eyes readjust to the dark, and you listen. No footsteps that shouldn't be there. No standing shadows. The street is empty in the way that streets are empty when nothing is wrong, which is a quality of emptiness you have become able to read. You've become able to read a lot of things you didn't know were readable when you arrived from Norwich. You walk home through streets that are dark and alive and cold and London, and you hold the evening inside you the way you hold warmth inside you when coming in from the cold, carefully, deliberately aware it will dissipate but trying not to let it go too fast. There is a particular loneliness to the life you live. You know this. You live it every day and you have no illusions about it. But it is not the simple, uncomplicated loneliness of isolation. It is something more complex. You're not entirely alone. You have the Three Elms. You have Farrow's quiet nod across a room. You have evenings like this one, where a man from Derbyshire with good shoes and careful hands talked to you for 2 hours, and the talking felt for a while like evidence that something real was possible. What you don't have is the architecture that would make it legible to the rest of the world. No wife, no shared address, no respectable story to tell. A man with a wife has an alibi for his whole life. The domestic life, the shared life, the life that happens behind a front door with someone else's name also on the rent ledger. That life is its own protection. It explains where you were on a given evening. It explains why your room is comfortable. It explains who you are in terms the city recognizes and accepts. You have none of that. You have a room in Mrs. Callaway's house that smells of tallow and no one else. You have a breakfast table where she mentions her daughter in Bermondsey. You have a landlady who looks at your continued bachelorhood like a fault in the plaster ceiling she can't quite get around to addressing. You walk home through the dark streets, your breath making small ghosts in the cold air, and you think about this in the calm, analytical way that you think about most things. the way a man thinks about the weather, or a problem in a legal document, or the kind of calculation you do when working out whether the coal in the grate will last until morning. Factual, honest with yourself, clear about the shape of things. This is London, 1833. You're 26 years old. You have built a respectable, visible life with great care and considerable skill. You have found in the hidden folds of the city something like community, something like connection. You have learned to hold both of these things simultaneously, the visible and the invisible, the ordinary and the unspeakable, and to move between them without the seam showing. Most days this is enough. Some days, in the cold dark of the walk home, you want to ask the city what it would cost to want something else, and then you remember the answer, which is a specific number in the statutes that your own neat hand has copied out twice, and you keep walking. Calvert's Lane, the Chandler's dark, its smell still present even with the shutters up. Number 14, the front door, the key in the lock, upstairs without noise, because Mrs. Callaway sleeps light and you've learned where every creaking stair is. The room, the cold, the ceiling. You take off your coat, you hang it over the chair. You sit on the edge of the bed and hold both hands in front of you for a moment, just looking at them. The ink stain on the inside of your right middle finger that has been there so long it's simply part of the skin now. The redness of cold, the slight roughness along the palm where cold and work combine to argue with the skin about its own integrity. A man's hands are what he does with them. Yours copy documents and they carry ale, and they have occasionally held someone else's hands in a dark room where the specific warmth of that was worth whatever came after. You lie down. You don't undress. The room is too cold. Outside, London continues. It always continues, even in the small hours when the streets are as quiet as London streets ever get. There is always something moving, always some transaction, always some person making their way between here and somewhere else. This city never fully sleeps. It has too much to do. It is the centre of an empire that covers a quarter of the world's surface, and all that surface is connected by ships and money and law and the endless movement of goods and people and paper, and all of it passes through this city at some point, and the city metabolizes all of it and asks for more. You're a very small part of that. A copying clerk, a single room, a man who loves men in a time and place that has decided this is worth a hanging. But you are here. You're surviving. You are making your careful way through the streets of the greatest city in the world, and every evening you come home and you are still here, and that is not nothing. You close your eyes. The church bell at St. Andrew's strikes 11. Tomorrow the summer scale probate. Tomorrow the remaining 17 pages. Tomorrow breakfast with Mrs. Callaway in the cold basin, and the coat that says nothing except ordinary, harmless, keep walking. But that's tomorrow. Right now, you drift. The winter tightens its grip on London in the way that London winters do. Not with the dramatic severity of the countryside, where frost comes hard and clean, but the particular urban misery of cold that is also damp, grey that is also smoky, streets that are also mud, days that are also short in a way that feels punitive, like the city is being made to stay after lessons. November becomes December. The mornings get darker, the afternoons get shorter, the mud gets deeper. You learn in your first winter in London, you learned it the first year and you've relearned it every year since, that cold in a city is different from cold anywhere else. It isn't just temperature, it is the cold of stone buildings that retain it. The cold of streets that are in permanent shadow because the buildings on either side are too high and too close. The cold of a river that breathes fog up into the streets every morning, cold fog that sits in your chest and makes the short walk from Calvert's Lane to Lincoln's Inn feel longer than it is. The cold of a room without a fireplace, which is not just a temperature but a statement about your position in the world, a fact that exists in the same register as the second-hand waistcoat and the weekly 15 shillings and the single room above the tallow smell. You manage. You have always managed. You were not raised to complain about managing. But on the mornings when the water in your washing basin has that near ice quality, and the light through the window is the colour of wet slate, and the sound of Holborn waking up arrives like an instruction rather than an invitation, on those mornings you understand in a very precise bodily way what it costs to live alone. Not the cost in shillings, the other cost. A married man has a warm body next to his in the cold mornings. A man with family nearby has somewhere to go on Sundays when the city has shut itself up in church and the streets go quiet and the particular silence of a single room becomes something you have to negotiate with rather than simply inhabit. A man with brothers, with cousins, with the ordinary web of relation that most men carry without noticing. That man has somewhere to be when the holidays come around, and the city briefly becomes something human. You have Mrs. Callaway's kitchen on Christmas morning. She gives you a glass of port which she keeps specifically for the occasion, and she mentions briefly that her daughter was not able to come after all, which she says in a way that suggests the failure is yours to share even though you had nothing to do with it. You drink the port, you say appropriate things about the season, you go to St. Andrew's for the morning service because it is Christmas, and because your mother would be hurt to know you didn't, even though your mother is in Norwich and will never know. In the church you sit in a pew and look at the stone columns and the coloured window and the candles and the congregation of Holborn going through the familiar motions of the familiar thing, and you feel the specific ache of belonging somewhere and not belonging somewhere simultaneously. You believe in something. You've worked out enough of your own theology over 26 years to have something you'd call belief, though it's not exactly what your mother would recognise. But the God you believe in is one who you have spent a great deal of time arguing with in private about the particular nature of your situation, and the God in the text of the Offences Against the Person Act of 1828 is a God you have never been able to fully reconcile with. You have come to a kind of peace with this, the peace of a man who has stopped expecting the two to align. After church you walk. Christmas Day in London has a quality unlike any other day. The shops shut, the traffic sparse, a hush over the streets that is almost eerie after the perpetual noise of the other 364 days. You walk east toward the city, where on Christmas morning even the financial heart of the empire has put down its ledger for the day. The streets of the square mile are nearly empty. Your footsteps echo. Your breath makes clouds that hang in the still air. You walk down to the river, the Thames at Christmas morning, with the city quiet and the fog lying over the water, and the ships at anchor with their masts bare, looks like the beginning of something or the end of something, and you can't always decide which. The water is grey and deep and cold, moving with the tide in its ancient indifferent way. On the south bank you can see the warehouses, the smoking chimneys of the Bermondsey tanneries, the outline of Southwark Cathedral against the winter sky. Somewhere on the south bank, in rooms you haven't been to and will not seek out, William from Derbyshire is spending Christmas morning. You thought about him the week after the Three Elms, in the way you think about most evenings at the Three Elms, with a practical, realistic assessment of what it was and what it wasn't. He was a conversation. He was 2 hours of ease. He was a man from Derbyshire who crossed the river on a Thursday evening to be somewhere he could be himself, the same as you. You have learned not to build too much on the conversations at the Three Elms. You have learned this the same way you learn most things, by doing the thing and experiencing the cost of the thing and deciding that the cost isn't worth it. There was a man 2 years ago, a printer named George, who worked near Clerkenwell, who you saw at the Three Elms for 4 months and who made you understand very clearly what it would feel like to want to go home to the same person every evening. And then George moved to Bristol for reasons that had nothing to do with you, and the room smelled like only you again, and you spent 2 weeks discovering exactly how different that was from 4 months earlier. You do not build too much anymore. You watch the river, the fog moves, a waterman's boat appears, ghost-like, carrying no passengers on Christmas morning, the waterman himself simply rowing in the way that people who have done a thing for 20 years sometimes do the thing when there's no reason to, for the sake of the doing, for the rhythm of it, for the particular way the oars catch the water and the boat responds. You watch him until he disappears into the fog downstream. Then you turn back toward Holborn. The weeks between Christmas and February are the hardest weeks. The cold is at its worst. The dark is at its worst. The distances between the warmth of the Three Elms and the cold of the single room feel longest when you're walking them. You have learned to build structure for these weeks. Small things. Things with no particular significance except that they give the days shapes. You allow yourself an extra coal scuttle on Saturdays. You allow yourself a glass of gin at the tavern on the corner once a week. Not the Three Elms, but the ordinary tavern where you drink alone and read and are nobody in particular. You allow yourself occasionally to spend the money on a single gallery seat at the theatre, where you can sit in the dark for 3 hours and watch people perform emotions that you spend the rest of your time carefully not performing. You have a particular fondness for the theatre. This may not be a coincidence. The Drury Lane Theatre is 15 minutes from Holborn, in a building rebuilt in 1812 after the previous one burned, the second previous theatre on that site to burn, which says something about theatres and fire and the particular combustibility of places where people gather to feel things. The current building holds 3,000 people. On the evenings when you spend the gallery price, a shilling, which is a substantial portion of an afternoon's wage but which you have decided is worth it, you arrive early and take a position at the rail of the upper gallery, where you can see the whole house, which is itself a kind of theatre. 3 tiers of boxes, each filling with people, the pit crowded and noisy, the chandeliers overhead throwing a warm, unsteady light over everything. You are a careful observer. You have had to be. You have spent 4 years watching people to understand what they are doing and what they might do, reading faces the way you read documents, looking for the ambiguity, the place where the meaning slips. In a theatre with 3,000 people around you, you can watch without consequence. You can look at the man 2 rows down in the pit who has his arm along the back of the bench and is watching the stage with the particular attention of someone whose attention is divided between the stage and the person beside him. You can watch the young men in the gallery 3 sections over who are laughing too loud and close. You can watch all of this with no cost and no consequence, because everyone in a theatre is watching something and nobody is watching you. This is the other thing about London, the thing that Norwich could never have given you. In a city this enormous, in a crowd this dense, in spaces this overwhelming, you can be invisible. And invisibility for a man in your situation is not a small gift. It is in many ways the gift that makes everything else possible. February turns to March. The cold begins to ease by degrees. The mornings get lighter. Your washing water, still cold, is no longer trying to ice. The plane trees in Lincoln's infield start doing something tentative with their buds, a suggestion of what's coming rather than the thing itself, but enough. You notice this every year, the first day when the light looks different, when there is something almost warm in it at midday, when the grey of the November to February city shifts into something more honest. You notice it every year, and every year it feels unreasonably significant, like a message meant specifically for you. The office brightens. The windows, which have spent the winter admitting only degrees of grey, begin to admit something more useful. The walks to and from Lincoln's Inn take on a different quality. You move through them differently. Spring changes how you move through London. In spring, the parks open themselves. In winter, the parks in London are places you pass through, on your way to somewhere warm. In spring in London happens quickly, the city's density creating a warmth that accelerates everything. The parks become themselves. The grass comes back. The trees make their decisions about leaves. The payers fill with the particular London mix of people who have been inside too long and have all simultaneously decided that outside is now acceptable. You go to the parks. Hyde Park on a Sunday in April is as close to a town square as London gets. A place where the city's class structure is momentarily suspended, or at least temporarily reorganised, by the simple fact of everyone being outside. The carriages take their loop around the ring, the wealthy observing and being observed in the specific theatre of the promenade. On foot along the Serpentine, everyone else, shop boys and seamstresses, clerks with their coats brushed and their hats straight, children with hoops, old men on benches, young women in groups of 3 walking in the particular formation that signals, "We are here to be seen, we are not here to be accosted." You walk the path along the Serpentine, which is grey-green in the spring light and which smells today of nothing worse than water and mud and the slightly wild smell of the reed beds along the near bank. The sun is on your face. This is the specific gift of an April Sunday in Hyde Park. Sun on your face. After 5 months of grey, this is nothing short of miraculous. You're not the only person here who is looking at other people. You're not the only person here who is calibrating something while appearing to look at nothing in particular. Hyde Park has always been. Not the places the Three Elms is, not that. But a public space where movement is possible, where men walk at a certain pace and sometimes stop to look at the water, and sometimes the space between them reduces for a moment and something is negotiated without words. You have learned the city's geography in ways that no map records. The official London, the map that anyone can buy from a publisher, with the streets and landmarks and the named squares. That map tells you where things are. But the other map, the one that exists only in the knowledge of the men who need it, tells you something different. It tells you which parks, which hours, which streets. It tells you which public houses have a back room and which have an upstairs and which simply look the other way. It tells you which coffee houses have ever had a problem and which ones have not, and what the problem was and who was involved and what happened to them afterwards. The afterwards is always important. You know what happened to the men who were found in a house in Vere Street in 1810, before you arrived in London. You have heard it told in the careful voices of men who were not there but who know someone who was. A house in Vere Street off Clare Market, kept by a man called James Cook, where men gathered the way they gather at the Three Elms, with the same careful purposes, and which was raided by Bow Street runners on the night of the 9th of July, and which resulted in the arrest of 23 men, and the prosecution of 6, and the imprisonment and pillory of all 6 of them. The pillory on the Haymarket, which was not just stocks and a crowd, which was a crowd that had spent 2 weeks reading about the case in the newspapers and had arrived with things to collect and throw. You know what was thrown. You have heard this in the kind of careful, flat voice that people use to talk about disasters that were survived, not by the people in the pillory, who did not survive unharmed, but by the knowledge of what is possible. You know about the dead cats and the rotten fish and the mud from the street, and what mud from a London street contains, and you know about the eye that was lost in the crowd's enthusiasm for the occasion. You know this, and you carry it like you carry most things, in the lower registers, the background frequency of your existence that you don't bring to the surface unless you need to, but which is always running, always running. This is what it is to be a man in London in 1833 who loves men. Not a constant terror, because you cannot live in constant terror and still walk straight, and still copy documents, and still eat breakfast with Mrs. Callaway, and still be useful and functional and present in the world. But a background frequency, a permanent understanding of the possible, a knowledge of the distance between where you are and where things can go. You have measured that distance precisely. You have built your life so that the distance is as large as you can make it. The respectable lodgings, the respectable employment, the respectable coat, the careful pace in the street. But you also know that some of the men who were arrested in Vere Street in 1810 were very careful men. Men with respectable employment and respectable lodgings and coats that said nothing except ordinary. Careful is not the same as safe. You have learned this too. You walk along the Serpentine in the April sunlight, and you are right now just a man walking in a park, and the sun is on your face, and the water reflects the sky, and a child with a wooden boat is racing it along the bank and falling over with the pure physical comedy of being 4 years old and unsteady on your feet, and his mother is laughing, and the whole scene has the quality of something that is simply happening, simply existing, without requiring anything from you except your presence in it. You stop. You look at the child with the boat. You look at the water. You stand there for a moment with your hands in your pockets and your face turned toward the sun. This is also your life, not just the calculating and the managing and the careful distances. This too, the sun and the water and the child and the particular ease of a Sunday morning in April, when you have nowhere you need to be until tomorrow morning. You've earned this too. The summer of 1833 is hot. London summers are not, as a rule, a pleasure. The city in summer is the city's worst argument against itself, the heat concentrating every smell, the streets becoming a kind of participatory sensory experience that nobody chose to participate in. The Thames is at its worst in July and August. The smell coming off it in the mornings when the tide is low and the mud flats are exposed is a smell of such particular and comprehensive unpleasantness that it's almost architectural. It fills space the way a wall fills space. You don't so much smell it as encounter it. And there is cholera. Cholera arrived in England in 1831, and by the summer of 1832 it had moved through London with the kind of democratic thoroughness that most things in London fail to achieve, killing the poor primarily but not exclusively, spreading through the water supply in ways that the medical establishment does not yet understand and which it attributes variously to miasma, to constitution, to the particular moral quality of the neighbourhoods affected, the Broad Street pump off Golden Square, the courts and closes of St Giles, the riverside slums of Bermondsey and Wapping where families live 12 to a room above the tide line. In 1833 it is not gone. It is quieter than the previous year, but it is there the way a fire is there even after the visible flame is out, in the coals, in the heat, capable of coming back. You are more careful about water in the summer. You notice in ways that people who haven't spent a summer in London learning the landscape of its water supply don't notice, which pumps the neighbourhood has decided it can trust and which ones it hasn't. You fill your basin from the pump on Holborn itself rather than the one in the courtyard behind the house, which is closer to the drain. This may or may not make a difference. The medical establishment, as noted, is unclear. But you do it because doing something feels better than doing nothing, and because the only thing worse than cholera would be dying of cholera while remaining unclear whether you could have prevented it. The summer scale probate is finished by the end of the week after Christmas, as Mr. Hartley required. 47 pages, clean copy, no errors. He reviews it for 9 minutes and says nothing negative, which is everything. Through the spring and into the summer, you work your way through Hartley and Symes's caseload with the same careful efficiency, and by August, Mr. Hartley does something unprecedented. He gives you a raise, not large, 6pence a week, but deliberate, recognised, communicated in writing, which in the vocabulary of Hartley and Symes is not so much a raise as a declaration of policy. You are, it appears, becoming indispensable. This is its own kind of protection. This is part of the calculation. A man who is indispensable to a respectable law firm is a man with a character that has been, in effect, co-signed by that firm. If anything ever came to a magistrate, if some piece of information arrived in some official channel about the man at the Three Elms, the weight of Hartley and Symes, 4 qualified solicitors, and 18 years of clean reputation at Lincoln's Inn would be on the scale against it. Not an absolute protection. Nothing is absolute. But wait. You take the raise and you put half of it away. You've been putting money away since you arrived. Not a great deal, on 15 shillings a week. After lodgings and food and coal, there is not a great deal to put away, but something. You have a box under your bed, Mrs. Callaway's floorboards being insufficiently dramatic for a lockbox, in which there are currently £11 and 7 shillings. This money is for something you haven't fully decided yet. It might be for eventual independence, for the deposit on a small set of rooms, for the ability to move out of Mrs. Callaway's house into somewhere you can fully control the atmosphere of. It might be for emergencies. It might be for something else that you haven't gotten to the point of thinking about directly yet. But it is there. It exists. It is the material form of the idea that you might at some point want something more than what you currently have. In August, on a Sunday when Mrs. Callaway is visiting her daughter in Bermondsey, and the house is empty, and the summer heat has turned the second-floor room into something actively uncomfortable, you take the box out and count the money again, and sit on the edge of the bed holding it in your hands and think. The problem, when you get to the bottom of it, is not money. The problem is not respectability. You have both of those in reasonable quantities. The problem is that all the structures through which a man in 1833 might legitimately build a life, marriage, household, family, the shared domestic project that the city recognises and accommodates, all of those structures require a woman. Not a woman you want, but a woman as a kind of architectural element, a structural necessity, the load-bearing wall of a socially legible life. Without that wall, everything else you build is in a peculiar position. Not illegal, not scandalous by itself. A bachelor is not a criminal. Plenty of men never marry for economic reasons, for personal reasons, because they chose not to. Bachelors are not rare and not particularly noticed, but they are suspect in a way that the city makes clear in small, constant ways. Mrs. Callaway's periodic mention of her daughter, the colleagues at the office who invite their married counterparts to dinners and who do not quite invite you. The understanding that a man alone is a man without a witness, a man whose private life is unverified, a man who could be anything behind the door. No wife, no alibi. That is the shape of it. You have thought about this for 4 years, and you have not arrived at conclusion. The conclusion would require a level of risk assessment that you are not yet prepared to complete. Because the thing you want, not abstractly, not in theory, but concretely, the thing you have thought about lying in the cold room in the dark, is what William from Derbyshire has when he goes home to Suffolk. Not William specifically, but what he represents. A door that 2 people can close behind them. A room that has the smell of 2 lives in it. Someone across a table in the morning who knows what you are. You put the money back in the box. You put the box back under the bed. You go downstairs and sit in Mrs. Callaway's empty kitchen and drink the tea that she left in the pot this morning. Cold now, slightly stewed, still tea. And you watch the summer afternoon make its way through the kitchen window, and you think about nothing in particular for a while, which is its own kind of rest. You have become reasonably good at that too, at the nothing particular, at giving your mind permission to be quiet for 15 minutes while the afternoon goes by, and the kitchen is warm and the tallow smell that is the smell of this house is, right now, just the smell of this house, just a smell, just a fact. Outside, somewhere in the distance, London goes on being London. It is in September, in the specific quality of September light that is not summer anymore, but is also not yet winter. The light that is gold rather than yellow, that comes at a lower angle and throws longer shadows, and makes even the grimy stone of the Inns of Court buildings look almost warm. That you meet James. This is not the place for the full account of James, because no account of James is brief, and you have been trying for 6 months now to write his accounting in your head in a way that is brief and honest, and that concludes with something other than the shape it actually has. But this is where it starts. September, in the churchyard at St. Clement Danes on the Strand, which is a place you sometimes cut through on the longer route between Lincoln's Inn and everywhere east of it, and which at 4 in the afternoon on a September Tuesday has approximately 5 people in it, of whom you are one. He's sitting on a bench near the south wall with a book in his lap, and the specific expression of a man who is reading but also aware of the churchyard around him in ways that go beyond reading. When you pass, he looks up, and there is a moment, the briefest possible moment, of mutual recognition. Not of names, not of faces, of something under the faces. You keep walking. At the gate, you slow. You think, no. You think actually. You think the specific thoughts of a man who has talked himself out of this before, who knows the cost of talking himself out of this, who also knows the cost of not. You go back. You sit on a bench at the other end of the churchyard, not his bench, at a reasonable remove. You take a letter from your coat pocket, a letter from your mother received last week, which you have been meaning to reply to, and you appear to read it. 5 minutes pass. 10. The light moves on the stone of the church wall, warming and then shifting. What is it? He says. He has walked over without you hearing him, which says something about how he moves through spaces. Letter from home, you say, which is true. Norwich? He's looking at the postmark stamp on the outside. You know Norwich. Grew up 40 miles south of it. Ipswich. And there it is. The beginning of things. Not dramatic. Not the stuff of romantic narrative. 2 men in a churchyard. A letter from a mother in Norwich. The September light on stone. And the specific manner in which 2 people who've been careful for a long time recognise that they can right now be a little less careful. James teaches music. He gives piano lessons to the children of families in Marylebone and Bloomsbury who have pianos and aspirations and disposable income, travelling between households with a battered leather bag containing his teaching materials, living in rooms off Russell Square that are nicer than yours, maintained at a level that reflects the irregular but cumulatively reasonable income of a man who has 12 regular pupils and a reputation for results. He is 31. He came to London from Ipswich at 23, for reasons he describes as simply that he had to, which you understand completely and do not ask to explain. He's been in London 8 years. He has the city in him in a way you are still acquiring. He knows things about it that you don't. He knows the sound of the Aldgate pump in early morning, which is a specific sound he describes with such precision that you can almost hear it. He knows which bookseller off the Strand has the best foreign stock, and will let you stand reading for an hour without purchasing anything. He knows the churchyard you're currently sitting in, like he knows his own rooms, the bench, the angle of the afternoon light, the particular acoustics of the stone walls. He has found his own ways of being in the city. You talk for an hour, then you go in different directions, because you have learned to go in different directions, and he has learned the same. But 3 days later, at the Three Elms, he is there. Nell raises an eyebrow, which for Nell is a complete sentence. You move your ale slightly left on the bar to create space. Thomas, he says. James. You drink. The room continues around you in its careful, warm, particular way. This is not the story of how everything became simple. Nothing becomes simple. The world in which you live does not change. The Offences Against the Person Act, 1828, Section 16, remains exactly what it is. The pillory, not yet abolished, remains an available instrument. The magistrates of London remain susceptible to information from informers, from malicious neighbours, from the blackmailers who have made a specific practice of leveraging the particular vulnerability of men like you. None of this changes. What changes is the accounting, the thing in your chest that you've been conducting for 4 years as a set of careful, realistic, managed calculations that shifts in its constitution, not dramatically, not all at once, but something in the weight of the evenings at the Three Elms, something in the walk home afterward, something in the quality of the room's silence when you return. All of it moves by a small amount that is in aggregate significant. James comes to the Three Elms on Thursdays. You start going on Thursdays. Phillips notices, the way Phillips notices everything without comment, that you seem more energetic on Thursday mornings, which is the opposite of what Thursday mornings were before. He says nothing. He is Phillips. The autumn deepens. October arrives with its particular London quality. The days still sometimes bright, the evenings coming in faster, the smell of leaf smoke beginning to mix with the perpetual coal smoke, and occasionally, on the best days, a crispness is the air that is clean and almost honest. You walk to the Three Elms on Thursday evenings, and you stay longer than you used to, and you walk home later, and the cold doesn't feel as cold as it did. There are still the calculations. the distance you maintain in public, the care with which you do not look, do not adjust, do not in any small way be readable from the outside as what you are. This doesn't change. It can't change. But you carry it differently now, or the weight of it is the same, but it sits differently on you. The way a pack of the same weight can feel lighter once you've found the right way to balance it across your shoulders. One evening in November, the anniversary of your first winter in London, you and James walk home in the same direction, maintaining the appropriate distance for two men who are walking the same way by coincidence, talking in the low voices of men having a conversation that would be unremarkable to anyone passing, and you realise at the corner of High Holborn that for the first time in 4 years you're not arriving home to a room that smells like only you, not physically. James turns left, you turn right. You go to your respective rooms in your respective houses and you sleep in your respective beds. But in some accounting, you are only beginning to understand the room smells different. You lie in the dark and you hold this thought up and look at it for a while. You are a careful man. You've been careful for so long that carefulness has become less a strategy than a constitution, less something you do than something you are. And careful men have careful relationships with hope, which is an agent of incaution, which is a luxury you haven't been sure you could afford. But here, in the November dark of the single room above the tallow smell, with Holborn going about its business outside, and Mrs. Callaway's floors creaking their familiar positions below, and the near ice water in the basin waiting for morning, here you let yourself hope for something, not everything, not the domestic legibility, the shared address, the visible life that the law and the city would recognise. That isn't available and may never be, and you are honest enough with yourself to know this. But something within the available perimeter, something small and real and warm, something worth walking home for. You close your eyes. The trouble when it comes in March, not to you, not directly, but close enough that it comes through you in the way that things pass through wire, not the current itself, but the vibration of it. A man named Henshaw. You don't know him well, but you've seen him at the Three Elms perhaps 4 or 5 times over the past year. A draper's assistant from somewhere in the city, thin, nervous, in his early 30s, with a particular quality of someone who has been frightened for so long that the fright has become a default state. You have exchanged perhaps 20 words with Henshaw in total. You know his face the way you know the faces of everyone at the Three Elms. Part of the furniture, part of the landscape. A presence you register but don't particularly attend to. In the second week of March, Henshaw is arrested. You hear it from Farrow, who hears it from someone else. The information moving through the network in the careful, compressed way that important information always moves, not in full sentences, not with names any louder than necessary, but in the abbreviated code of people who have learned to transfer meaning in the most risk-efficient way possible. Henshaw, Bow Street, 2 officers, a man who may have been watching the Three Elms for some time. The specific source of the information is unclear, but the general shape is not. Someone talked, or someone was paid, or someone was caught and traded. The arrest is not for anything that happened at the Three Elms. The arrest is for something that happened elsewhere, in a court off Fleet Street, which is the kind of information that makes everything you know about Henshaw reconfigure in your head in a single instant. The arrest is for what the law calls assault with sodomitical intent, which is not the act itself but the attempt, and which carries its own penalties, lighter than the hanging offence but substantial. The pillory, hard labour, transportation possibly. Henshaw is in Bow Street. You find out on a Thursday. You do not go to the Three Elms that Thursday. You go home directly from the office and you sit in your room and you think, the calculation is not complicated. It is in fact the same calculation you have been running since you arrived in London, now triggered by a proximate event rather than an abstract possibility. Henshaw is at Bow Street. Bow Street has Henshaw's information. What is Henshaw's information? You don't know. You do not know whether Henshaw knows your name, whether he has seen you clearly enough to describe, whether in the circumstances of arrest a man volunteers information about other men, or whether fear makes him protect the people he knows. You don't know any of this. What you know is distance and patience and time. You do not go to the Three Elms for 3 weeks. You walk past it on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, from the other side of the street, and look at it without stopping. The same door, the same dark window, the same sign with its faded trees. Inside, presumably, the same warm room with its careful voices and its low-pitched conversations, and Nell drawing ale without comment. You keep walking. James, you manage to speak to briefly at a bookseller's near the Strand, which is a place that neither of you frequents primarily for books, and both of you know it. 3 minutes, standing at adjacent shelves. He is careful too. His face, when you see it, does what faces do when people are managing something. It stays very still. He has heard. He has made the same calculation. How long? He says quietly, to a page of music theory. I don't know. The information is probably limited. Probably. A pause. You both turn pages. The Inns of Court, he says, there's a churchyard. I know the one. 2 Sundays. You move to the next shelf. Right, you say, and that is the entirety of it. You put down your book, a collection of philosophical essays that you have no intention of reading but which serves its purpose. And you leave the shop and you walk back to Holborn in the March afternoon, with your coat pulled up and your pace steady and your face doing nothing at all. The 3 weeks at home are their own education. You have managed alone before. You have lived in this room for 4 years, and you know its textures and its sounds and its rhythms the way you know the summer scale probate or the route from Lincoln's Inn to Covent Garden, automatically without having to think about it. You manage. You work. You eat breakfast with Mrs. Callaway, who has stopped mentioning her daughter in Bermondsey, which may be progress, or may simply mean she has transferred her attentions to someone else. But the 3 weeks have a weight that they didn't have before James. This is the cost of the calculation you made last autumn. You have let something in, and now you feel its absence, and you're clear-eyed enough to know that this is a cost you accepted when you let it in, and you're also clear-eyed enough to know that you would make the same decision again. On the 2nd Sunday after the bookseller's conversation, you go to St. Clement Danes churchyard. It is a grey March morning, the sky committed to its greyness, the churchyard quiet in the way that churchyards are quiet when it isn't Sunday service. You sit on your bench. It has become your bench in the way of places that attach themselves to specific memories, and you wait. He comes around the corner at 11. He sits on the other end of the bench. He looks at his hands for a moment. Henshaw was transported, he says. 7 years. 7 years in the Australian colonies, at the end of which he will be a free man in a country so far from London that it might as well be the moon. And the other information? Limited, as far as I can tell. He named 2 men who were also arrested. Neither of them was anyone from... He pauses. Anywhere either of us knows. You breathe. The churchyard breathes around you. The bare trees at the south wall are beginning to do things with their buds, very tentative things, but present. I think we're clear, James says. I think so too. A pause. The March wind moves through the churchyard with a cold that is less intense than February's but still making a point. I missed the Thursday evenings, he says, to the stone path in front of the bench. Yes, you say. And then, because neither of you needs to say more than this, and because you're both men who have learnt the economy of necessary speech, you're both quiet for a while in the churchyard on the grey March Sunday, and the city goes on around you, and the trees continue their tentative work, and something that was briefly under threat is, for now, intact. This is what survival looks like. Not dramatic, not a victory with flags, a man on a bench in a churchyard in March, breathing, present, here, still here. You'll go back to the Three Elms next Thursday. You'll walk in and Nell will draw your ale without being asked, because that is what Nell does, and Farrow will nod from across the room, and the room will settle back around you in its particular warm way, and something will be simple again in the way that it can be simple for 3 hours on a Thursday evening. But right now, you just sit. The spring comes fully in April. It always does. London spring is not the country spring of your childhood, not the clean breaking open of fields in Norfolk, not the specific smell of cold wet soil warming in the March sun with the sea wind behind it. But it's spring. The plane trees in Lincoln's Inn make their decision about leaves and commit to it. The plane trees do not do things by halves once they've decided. You turn 27 in April, which is not a significant birthday except that you notice it. You've developed the habit in London of noticing your own birthdays with something between ceremony and surveillance. Each one a kind of check. Here is where I am. Here is what I have. Here is what the year built and what it cost. 27 is the age your father was when he married your mother in the Norwich church you were baptized in 3 years later. 27 is the age that, from the outside, looks like the full stop of youth and the beginning of something else. You are not your father. Your life does not look like his life and is not going to. You have known this since you were 16 and working for Aldous the printer, and Jack was teaching you what you were. But 27 feels like a moment to be clear about it, to stand at the window in the April morning and look at the lane and the chandlers and the grey-blue sky that is lightening into something almost promising, and say, this is the life I am building, with the materials available, in the city I chose, the life that is mine, the life that fits. It is not everything. It never will be. There are costs that don't resolve, distances that don't close, the permanent arithmetic of living in a time and place that has made you into something it has simultaneously decided is criminal. You carry this the way you carry the cold in the winter. It is present. It is real. It does not stop you from moving. But you are moving. On a Saturday in late April, James brings you to see something he has wanted to show you since October. He gives it this introduction so you won't be disappointed if it's nothing, and it is not nothing. It is Parliament Hill, on the high ridge of Hampstead Heath, 5 miles north of the city, where you've never been, and from the top of which, on a clear April morning with the light coming flat and golden from the east, you can see London the way London almost never lets you see it. The walk up from the bottom of the heath takes 20 minutes, and your calves know it. The heath itself is remarkable. A wilderness, genuinely wild, the grass rough, and the gorse and heather giving it a texture completely unlike the managed parks. Hyde Park with its clipped lawns and its promenade and its aspirations. Up here there's mud and wind and the smell of wet heather, and the sky is enormous in a way that London streets never permit, The sky is above you and around you, and you can see across to where Highgate sits on its own hill to the northeast, and the whole thing has the quality of the world being larger than you remembered. You reach the top of Parliament Hill, and there is London. It is different from the views you've had before, different from the river, different from the bridges, different from any street-level perspective. From here, you see it whole, the great grey-brown mass of it, spreading across the basin of the Thames Valley from horizon to horizon. The dome of St. Paul's, smaller from here than you expect but unmistakable, rising above everything else in the middle distance, the river, curving silver through the heart of the city. The forest of church spires. There are more than 100 churches in London, and from up here you can believe it. They stick up above the roofline like pins in a map. The smoke rising from 1,000 chimneys in columns that widen and merge in the upper air into the general London haze that sits over the city at all hours like something it's decided to wear. And the ships in the Thames below. Even from here, 5 miles north, you can see the masts of the ships in the Pool of London, the forest of them, the impossible density of that forest against the grey silver water. 2 million people are in that haze right now, in that brown-grey mass that stretches from here to the horizon. 2 million lives happening simultaneously. Extraordinary, James says next to you. He's not looking at the view. He's looking at your face, looking at the view, which is something you've noticed he does. Attends to you the way he attends to the music when one of his pupils finally gets something right, with a satisfaction that is partly aesthetic and partly something warmer. Yes, you say. You don't say more, because you don't have more, because the vocabulary for what you're feeling up here is either too large or too small, one of the two. This is the city that contains you. That enormous, indifferent, complex, dangerous, alive thing spreading out below you has room in it for you. Has room for the Three Elms and for St. Clement Danes churchyard, and for the Thursday evenings, and for the man beside you who watches your face when you look at things. It also has in it the Offences Against the Person Act 1828, and the magistrates, and the Bow Street runners, and the pillory at the Haymarket, and the men who will sell information about you for money. All of it is down there. All of it is in the same 2 million people, and the same brown-grey mass, and the same air you breathe every day. You have known this for 4 years, and you know it again now, more completely, from up here where you can see the whole shape of it at once. The wind comes off the heath from the west, cold still in April, smelling of grass and distance. It pushes at your hat and you put your hand up to hold it, and James laughs at the gesture, quietly, and then looks back at the view. You stay up here for an hour. Then you walk back down into the city and it closes over you, and you're inside it again, and the streets are the streets, and the smell is the smell, and the sound is the sound that never fully stops, and you are back inside the enormous, complicated machine of it, a small piece of its working, moving purposefully through the current. Calvert's Lane in the evening, the Chandlers, number 14, the key, the room, the cold water still slightly brown, the coat over the chair, Mrs. Callaway's voice from the kitchen. "You'll want supper?" "Please," you say. Your voice is tired and warm at once in a way that is hard to separate out. You were out all day. "Parliament Hill," you say, "on the heath." A pause. She appears at the bottom of the staircase. She looks at you for a moment with the expression that has lived in her face for 4 years, the expression that has no polite name but which contains in it the full sum of what she has observed and concluded about you over this time. And then, for the first time, something in the expression shifts, softens, becomes something else. She says nothing more and goes back to the kitchen. Something has passed between you. You're not sure what, only that it has. You go upstairs, the seasons turn, this is what they do. London's year has its rhythms, and you have absorbed them now so completely that you barely track them consciously. The tightening of October, the cold of December, the tentative shift of March, the committed warmth of June when the parks fill and the evenings extend and the city briefly remembers that it could be beautiful. You're 28 in the spring of the next year, then 29. Time in London does something to your sense of time, the city's density and pace compressing it. Weeks becoming months without the pastoral markers you were raised with. In Norwich, time had seasons and harvests and the visible changes of a place where the landscape participates in the year. In London, time has Hartley and Symes cases and coal prices and the level of the box under your bed that now holds £17 and 3 shillings. You get better at your work. This is not an accident. You have decided in the way that you decide most things, deliberately after analysis with clear eyes about the investment and the return, that your work is worth getting better at. Mr. Hartley's raise was not the last. By the following year there is another, bringing you to 16 and 6 and then to 18 shillings. And then, this summer when you are 29 and the Inns of Court are drowsing in the heat, to the position of senior clerk, with Phillips retiring to Islington and the new copying clerk, a boy of 18 from somewhere in Hertfordshire, looking at you the way you once looked at Phillips. Senior clerk. The title sits differently on the coat than copying clerk did. The coat itself is new, a better wool, a proper blue-black, purchased from a decent shop in the Strand for 12 shillings, which is the most you have ever spent on a single garment, and which felt for about 20 minutes like extravagance, and then felt like correctness, which is a better feeling. You are becoming a Londoner. You were always becoming one. From the first morning in Mrs. Callaway's kitchen with the cold basin water and the tallow smell. But now you can feel the completion of it. The way you move through the streets. The way you know the names of things that don't have signs. The way the city's sounds have sorted themselves in your head into, this is fine, this is worth attention, this is something to rout around. You're no longer reading the city, you know it. James, for his part, has added 3 pupils in Bloomsbury and has begun tentatively to compose. He shows you the work in the evening sometimes, not at the Three Elms, but in the churchyard or walking in the parks, carrying a few pages of notation that he describes with his hands because he can't play them in the street. You understand perhaps a third of what he's talking about, technically. You understand all of it in the way that matters, which is he is making something. He is finding in the materials available to him something worth making. You understand this completely. Your own making is different. It is not art. It is not music or composition or anything that could be shown. Your making is the £17 in the box and the coat that fits correctly, and the position of senior clerk, and the respectable life that has been built, one careful brick at a time, on the foundation of a room above a chandler's and a cold washing basin, and 4 years of holding your face precisely still. You have made yourself someone who belongs here. Not to a house that has another name on the ledger, not to a life that the city officially recognises, but to London, to its rhythms and its smells and its sounds, to the specific Thursday evenings and the churchyard on Sundays and the view from Parliament Hill. to the particular warmth of the Three Elms when Nell draws your ale without asking, and Pharaoh nods from across the room and James is there already, his coat on the back of the chair, his hands around his glass. This is yours. It is more than you were sure you'd have. On a Thursday evening in October, in the 3rd year after Henshaw, there is a moment. Nothing dramatic. The moments you carry longest are never dramatic. You are at the Three Elms, the usual hour, the usual ale, and James is talking about a pupil of his. A girl of 12 in Marylebone who has, he says, something that most of his pupils don't, some quality in her playing that goes past technique into something that can't be taught. And while he's talking, you are watching his face do the thing it does when he talks about music that he believes in, which is that it stops performing patience and becomes simply honest, becomes the face of a man who is genuinely moved by the thing he's describing, which is one of James's most specific qualities, this willingness to be moved. And you think, I know this person, not in the way you know Phillips, which is the knowledge of proximity, not in the way you know Mrs. Callaway, which is the knowledge of dependency, in the way that means, I know how he moves through a room and what his face does when he's hiding something versus when he's simply quiet, and the specific way he holds his glass when he's thinking something he hasn't decided yet whether to say. I know the sound of his laugh in a space where he doesn't have to be careful about it. I know the things that make him angry, and the things that make him forget to be guarded, and the things that make him sit very still and look at nothing for a moment and then come back. I know this person. You let yourself have this. You drink your ale and you listen to him talk about the girl in Marylebone with her specific, unteachable quality, and you let yourself have the knowledge of him, the fact of him, the specific gravity of a person who is present in your life in a way that has weight and texture and smell, and the particular warmth of a room that has another person in it. This is not everything that's possible. You know that. There are things that aren't available, distances that won't close, costs that can't be made to disappear by wanting them gone. The world you live in has made certain decisions about you and has not, as yet, reconsidered them. But this is something. This is real and present and yours right now in this low-ceilinged room with its coal smoke and its careful voices, and Nell behind the bar and Pharaoh's nod from across the room, and October pressing cold against the windows, and everything outside exactly as dangerous and as various and as vast as it has always been. You are here. You have built this from almost nothing, in a city that was not designed with you in mind, in a time and place that has names for what you are, and none of them are kind. You have built it carefully and honestly, and with the consistent application of clear eyes and steady hands, and the understanding that the work of making a life is not done in a single gesture, but in the accumulation of small, persistent choices. This is what that accumulation looks like. A room that smells like more than one person's life now. A box with 17 pounds that is growing. A coat that fits. A position that has weight. A Friday at a churchyard and a Thursday at the Three Elms and a Sunday on Parliament Hill, where London spreads itself out below you like an argument you've been having with it for years and are beginning slowly to win. This is where the evening of the mind begins its slow shift. You have walked home now, the familiar route through the Holborn streets. Your footsteps on the cobblestones, the specific sound of a man going home, and the cold is a clean cold tonight, dry rather than damp, and above the rooftops there are actually stars, rare in London, usually smothered by the smoke and the clouds, but tonight visible, a scattering of them between the chimney pots, white and very far away. You stand in Calvert's Lane for a moment and look up at them. The Chandler's is dark and shut. Number 14 is dark except for the lamp in Mrs. Callaway's downstairs room, her candle behind the curtain, the evidence that she is awake and reading, which is what she does on evenings when she can't sleep. You will not disturb her. You will go quietly upstairs to the room that is yours, the key in the lock, the door, the stairs in their familiar sequence. 3rd step, 5th step, the loose board on the landing that you step over by instinct, the room. You sit on the edge of the bed. You take off your coat and hang it over the chair, the same gesture you have made every evening for 4 years, the coat going over the back of the chair with the specific weight of good wool and the specific smell of tonight, which is coal smoke and ale and London in October, and something that is just the evening, just the fact of having been out in it. The room is cold, the water in the basin will be cold. Tomorrow morning it will be the same cold it has always been, and you will wash your face and put on the coat and go down to breakfast, and Mrs. Callaway will be there, and the tea will be stewed slightly past delicacy, and the bread will be bread. And then Lincoln's Inn, and the summer scale probate's distant successor, whatever the current case is, and the scratch of pen on paper, and Phillips's replacement across the room, doing Phillips's job with Phillips's precise economy, and the fire doing its best, and the window that doesn't quite close, and 5 o'clock, and the gate, and the evening, and Thursday, the Three Elms, and Nell, and Farrow, and James. This is the shape of it. Ordinary and extraordinary simultaneously, impossible and real. The life that you have built from the available materials in the available space with the available tools. Tomorrow will ask the same things of you that today asked. You will give them. You have always given them. Your hands are steady. They have always been steady. But right now, you don't have to be steady. Right now, you can put the steadiness down and let the room be what it is, which is cold and quiet and London, and you can lie back on the mattress that has lost its stuffing on the left side where you always sleep, and you can let the ceiling be the ceiling, with its familiar crack in the plaster and its damp soft spot in the corner, and its particular darkness that you know the way, you know your own face. You close your eyes. The city is out there, all 2 million of it. All the haze and the ships and the cholera and the gin and the pillory and the Offences Against the Person Act 1828, Section 16, and the magistrates and the Bow Street runners and the beautiful dome of St. Paul's rising above it all with its magnificent indifference to everything that happens beneath it. All of it is out there. It was there when you arrived 4 years ago with nothing but a canvas bag and a letter and your mother's Bible that you've never opened, and it will be there tomorrow and next week. And in all the years of Thursdays and Sundays and cold basin water and scratch of pen on paper that stretch out ahead of you into the future you cannot yet see, let it be out there. Right now there is just the room, just the ceiling, just the cold that is not quite as cold as it was in the winter, not yet, still the soft cold of October, the cold that says something is coming but not yet, not tonight. You are warm enough, you have managed, you have been, today and every day, the person you set out to be. You are still here. The church bell at St. Andrew's rings from somewhere across the rooftops. Once, twice, 3 times. 11. 3 hours until the city's version of quiet. You don't need to count them. You're already going somewhere deeper than counting. Somewhere below, in the city, a waterman rows his boat in the dark and the oars catch the Thames and the Thames gives way. And he's been doing this for 30 years and he'll do it tomorrow. And the water doesn't care and the dark doesn't care, and neither do the stars you saw briefly between the chimney pots. London breathes, you breathe, and some part of you, The part that arrives at these moments as a small remainder after everything else has been accounted for. The part that is neither the copying clerk nor the careful walker, nor the man at the Three Elms, but something prior to all of those. Something that was there in the printer's shop in Norwich when Jack first looked at you and you understood what you were. That part settles now into the particular piece of a body that has done its work today. The images come in the order they always come, when sleep is close. Mrs. Callaway's kitchen, the tea, the grey-green light off the Serpentine, Pharaoh's nod, James's face when he talks about music. Parliament Hill in the April morning and London spread below like a question you've stopped being afraid to answer. The plane trees in Lincoln's Inn making their decisions, the stars between chimney pots. Let it all go quiet now. Let the voices and the carts and the bells and the calls and the constant engine of the city slow to something bearable, something distant, something that is just sound without content. You've earned the quiet. You've been careful enough, for long enough, through enough cold mornings and difficult calculations and close moments, and the weight of all the things you hold without showing. You have been careful, and you have been honest where honesty was safe, and you have built what you have built. It's enough. Let the room be dark. Let the sounds become just sounds, just the city doing what cities do, no longer asking you for anything, no longer requiring your attention. Let your hands stop working. They've worked enough today. Let the careful performance of ordinary, harmless, nothing interesting here finally rest. Because there is no one watching now. There is just you in the room, in the dark, in the city, which is enormous and indifferent and full of people trying to make it through to morning, the same as you, the same as everyone. The same as the waterman on the Thames who has been rowing for 30 years and doesn't think about it anymore, just rows. You don't have to think anymore tonight. Let the thoughts go. Let the ceiling go. Let the cold go and the coat go and the ledger go and the careful face go and the calculations go. All of it released into the quiet dark of an October night in a city that contains multitudes, that contains all possible versions of the human, that contains even you, even this, even the Tuesday evenings at the churchyard and the Thursday evenings at the Three Elms and the £17 in the box and the life built from almost nothing that is quietly, stubbornly, irreducibly yours, just yours. Centuries will pass. The London you know will change beyond anything you could imagine. The streets will be lit at night, not by link boys with their pitch torches, but by gas, and then by something beyond gas, something that fills the night with a clean white light that banishes the dark entirely. The river will be tamed, the cholera will be beaten, the courts and rookeries and fever dens will be cleared, the buildings you walk past every day will come down and go up and come down again, and the city will make itself and remake itself across the decades without stopping, the way it has always done. The laws will change. One day, not soon, but one day. The law that you carry in the lower registers of your existence, the law in your neat copying clerk handwriting, section 16, every person convicted shall suffer death. That law will change. It will take longer than it should. It will change slowly and incompletely, and then more completely, and then it will change again, and none of the changes will undo what came before, but they will happen. Men will live openly in that city. Men will share front doors and names on rent ledgers, and the domestic life that the city recognizes and accommodates. They will walk in the streets without the cost. Some of them will walk in those streets past the churches and the law offices and the sights of the things that happened in the time before, not knowing, or half knowing, or knowing, and choosing to remember. Some of them, in the quiet of their rooms at night, will listen to a voice in the dark that tells them something about the people who came before. The careful men, the men with steady hands and respectable coats and rooms above chandlers' shops, the men who built their lives from the available materials and who held what they held and who survived. Not all of them survived, but some of them did. Some of them lay in the cold dark of October in a city that was theirs and not theirs and said, "I am still here." And that was enough. That is enough. Let it be enough. Let sleep come now the way sleep always comes for people who are tired and safe and present in a room that holds them. Warm enough, safe enough, here enough. The church bell strikes once more, distant, from somewhere across the rooftops of London, and then quiet. Just the room, just the dark, just this. Good night.